It's Sunday night at 8 o'clock, and that means it's time for the Sunday Night Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. I'm your host and your guide for the next 2 hours as we look at life through a biblical lens and try to solve all the world's problems in 2 hours. I did notice there were some folks in the room, as it were. Some of the experts say that you should start the video early so people know you're going to be there. Well, as soon as I do, I start seeing numbers pop up, and people are in there. You know, they're not talking to me though. I asked them, well, they're looking at me, and they didn't say anything. So I don't know if that means you can't do it until I push the right buttons, or whether you just don't care. Anyway, I'm glad you're here. We got a lot of stuff we're going to talk about. Ezzy's in the chat room. How you doing, Ezzy? He's from Wilmington. There'll be some other folks show up. You get in there, they'll talk to you. You can comment, and they'll comment, and we'll get a lot of interaction that way. We have a lot this week. You got the email. If you did not get the email, you need to let me know that. I have a running issue with my friend in New York, the missionary. The company that handles the emails is telling me in the when I go in and look at the addresses that he unsubscribed back in August of 2010. He swears up and down he's never unsubscribed anything, and I know he hasn't. He gets them because he comments. He sends me emails through the week, literature, different things he thinks I might be interested in, and so I took his name out, and then I put it back in. And it still shows up as unsubscribed. And so I told him, if you get one this week, let me know. And he promptly let me know he got it. So I don't know. Anyway, you need to be on the mailing list so that you can see the kinds of things that we're going to talk about. This evening we're going to talk about politics today, the truly flawed versus the truly arrogant. We're also going to look a little bit at the signs of the times, some of the events that are pointing their way toward the end of days in terms of biblical prophecy. We were regaled in the last week with scenes and different comments relative to a killer earthquake in Italy. It made me think about the frequency of earthquakes, big ones. What are the statistics on these sorts of things? The Bible says in the end days there will be tremendous earthquake, killer earthquakes that are going to be happening all around the world. Are we starting to see an increase in the frequency of these things? Is your pastor a theological pacifist? Take the test. A lot of I call them pastors. Some of them are just preachers. You know who I'm talking about. But they're theological pacifists. They don't want to take a stand on anything. They don't want to make a big deal about this or that. Well, you believe this and I believe that. It's okay. And some of these things are not okay. And so we'll look at some of that. And then I asked the question, why aren't pastors preaching an eschatology? Eschatology is the doctrine of final things, which is kind of the theme for this evening. And why is it that we don't see a lot of preachers going in that direction? Now, on TV and on the internet, of course, you have that. They kind of do the sensational stuff. But in your pulpits, are you hearing stuff about the end of days? The charismatic community is all excited about the fact that the best days are still ahead of us. And all this gloom and doom is just not what the Bible's talking about, that God is going to bring a great revival, and there's going to be this tremendous uplifting in the church and in the world and so forth and so on. And I still can't find that anywhere in the book. But you know about charismatics. There's so many of them out there that the book doesn't matter to them. And we've talked about some of that. If you are a John Hagee fan, you watch John Hagee down there in Texas. John has a video online claiming that the rapture is going to occur on Wednesday. Now, he preached this sermon about a year or so ago, according to the date. 2015. But he said August 30th, 2016, rapture. That's when you know a false teacher. And I'm not saying everything that John says is wrong, but he's a sensationalist. And when they start setting the dates, you just kind of move off into another corner. I watched that thing twice, and I still don't know what he's talking about. We also have a letter a listener wrote to me last week. I didn't mention this in any public way. I wanted to save it for this evening. But last week I talked a little bit about the 144,000 witnesses from the book of Revelation. I talked about them in terms of pouring out and preaching the gospel, and how, the indication is that millions of people are saved during this time period. But I mentioned that these people were not Christians, that these men were not preaching a Christian gospel. And a listener took me to task, wrote a paragraph. We'll share that a little bit later on in the show. It's the last week in August. Summer is over. I have my fall allergies. I got up this morning, I couldn't hardly hear a thing. Apparently here in South Carolina, whatever I'm allergic to attacks my head. And this is the second time, and this is worse than the first time. It actually made me feel a little ill. So I came home and went to bed. But I'm here for you. It's okay. I'll do fine. But summer is over, and the kids are going back to school. I know up north and other places, they're not going back till after Labor Day. But in the South, we send our kids back as soon as we can. We let them out early because it's hot. But they've been in school for a week already, some a little bit more than that. So you need to think about education. You need to think about the Bible Institute of Charleston. You can see it on the website. You see a link. You can go there. You got it on your email. You need to check that out. There's a sample lesson. There's an introductory video. This is not something that somebody's going to hold you accountable for, and it's going to be an awful educational. No, this is a 45-minute lecture from me on a subject. There's about 4 to 5 lectures per subject on the 10 basic doctrines of the Bible. Now, somebody's characterized it as getting a drink out of a fire hydrant. And some of that is because I have no one here to talk to. And so I just have information. If we were in a classroom, what I do in 40 or 45 minutes would probably take 3 days, 3 classes, 50-minute classes. But since nobody's interrupting me, nobody has a question, I can't ask anybody a question, there isn't anybody here, it kind of goes a little quicker. I'm not talking fast, but it is a lot of it. But you get to take your notes. You actually get to hang on to those videos for a while after the course is done. You can go back, you can look at them again. You're not going to hang on to them forever. They will go away someday. But you need to sign up for the Bible Institute. You can take it for credit, or you can just take it for interest, just because you'd like to see what's going on, what some of these things mean. You get the textbook, Thiessen's Systematic Theology. You get your notebook and you do this work. You have a basis for now looking into the Word of God and into these doctrines on your own. You can write to me your questions, whatever. If you want credit, there's an essay that you need to write, and there is a test you need to take. And you need to score at least an 80% on the test. I think it's an easy test. The folks who've taken it don't agree. But it's not like you're going to be punished. It's one of those things. You also need to think about Christmas. I know you're not. I'm not exactly thinking about Christmas. But there's a sense in which we really need to think that way. And when you think about Christmas, you think about giving gifts that matter. And you need to think about books. Frontal assault. We're going to be talking about some of the issues that this book covers tonight. And this is a book that you need to have in your hand, and you need to go back and you need to read through it on several occasions. It starts out as 5 chapters long. It's not a big book. I think it's about 78 pages or something like that. But it starts out with, what is the gospel? Are you sure? And then everything old is new again. We go back through church history and show how these things are not new. These attacks, these frontal assaults against the church are not new. In chapter 3, who is this man to whom the evangelical church is bound? One man changed the whole scene, all the picture, as it were, in terms of church and evangelism and everything. And we follow it blindly. And there's some indication the man wasn't even saved. And then we talk about revivalists and revivalism. That's a whole lot different than a revival. And then we have a chapter 5 is entitled A Window on the Future. You need to have that book. You need to give it to people you care about. You also have people in your life who struggle with what is the gospel and how does it work and why is it that I've been saved for 10 years and my life is still a mess and I feel like I'm not having victory in my life. Breaking Out. This is a book that goes through in, I think it's 8 chapters. The first 4 have to do with the gospel, starting right, thinking right, doing right, growing right. And the second part has to do with your Christian life as you live it. What's the issue? What's the purpose? What's the secret? What's important? And where do we go now? This is the same size book. It's a little bit more pages. It's got 85 pages in it. And it's 12 pitch. It's 1.5 lines between, spaces between the lines. It's set up for people who may have trouble as they get older seeing. It's in large print for a reason. It's comfortable, and that's what people tell me. But you need to order these books. You go to the website and you just click the links. Across the top it says links. When you do, you'll see them. Click them. You need to get about 5 or 6 of each for Christmas and hand out. You need to have them in your car. Give them to people when you run into them. They're great gifts to hand out. I was working a week or so ago, and I had one with me in the van, in the shuttle, and it was sitting on the console next to me, and a woman in the back seat went, "What's that?" We got into this conversation. I got a chance to share the gospel. I gave her the book. It's that simple. Practical applications. You need to do that. It wouldn't cost you more than $100. Wouldn't cost you $100 to buy 6 of each of these books. You want a shirt? You get a shirt. $30 commitment, $30 a month commitment. I'll send you the shirt for free. You also need to write to me if you have questions, comments, things you'd like to see or hear on the Bible Forum. This is a show not about me. It's about the Word of God, and it's more about you than it is anything. Tonight I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in the world in terms of the end times. Do we see any indicators? And my goodness, this week was one of those weeks. We learned that the Obama administration paid $1.3 billion to Iran in January to resolve a decades-old dispute over an undelivered military sale. They did that 2 days after the $400 million cash was flown to Tehran. They paid them in 13 separate payments of $999,999,999.99. Apparently there's a U.S. law forbidding payments over $1 billion. They shorted it by a penny. The last payment was $10 million. The money came from a little-known fund administered by the Treasury Department for settling litigation claims. And the way it's being presented is that it's a payment back to Iran. This so-called judgment fund is your money that Congress has permanently approved in the event that it's needing, allowing the president to bypass direct congressional approval to make settlement. We had previously paid out $278 million in Iran-related claims back in 1991 using this same fund. It settles that dispute that rose up in the 1970s when the Shah of Iran ordered some military equipment or purchased it, but before it could be delivered, the Shah was deposed. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution overthrew the Shah, and they ended diplomatic relations with the U.S. On January 17th, the administration paid Iran, the revolutionists, the account's $400 million in principal, and then turned around and paid the $1.3 million that was interest on the loan and so forth. The deal has faced a tremendous amount of scrutiny since the administration's acknowledgement this month that it used the money as leverage to ensure the release of 4 American prisoners. But it's not a ransom, even though the president and others have struggled to explain why the U.S. paid in cash. The president said it was because the United States and Iran didn't have banking relationship over the years of nuclear-related sanctions, but that wouldn't rule out using intermediary banks that maintain relationships with both. In discussing the $1.3 billion, apparently that's the way that was moved through foreign banks and so forth. And the question that I had was, if the Iranian government collapsed and the new government was a military threat to us, they broke off relations, why do we owe them anything? And why would we want to give them this kind of cash at this point in our lives together? Are we that naive? Or is there a purpose here not stated? You might have known that almost immediately upon getting those 4 Iranian Americans back, the Iranians took another one. And have you noticed the Venezuelans just did the same thing? Venezuela is dying the death. They're going broke. They have no money. They have no food. They have no oil. They have no gas, no water. They are really in deep, deep trouble. And just this week, they took an American who was over there to meet or to bring back a Venezuelan bride or something of that nature, and they're claiming that he was running guns. Of course, his mother said they have pictures of Venezuelan police carrying their guns into the apartment. Are they going to blackmail us? Nah, not really. Just this week, Iran confronted a U.S. warship in the Straits of Hormuz. You've heard about it if you watch the news. Iran's defense minister said that his country would confront any foreign vessel that enters its territorial waters. Of course, the Straits of Hormuz are considered international waters, but Iran has always considered them their waters. 4 Iranian warships came close to 2 U.S. Navy destroyers with their weapons uncovered. The minister insinuated the incident occurred inside Iranian territory, but it was definitely in the Straits. The USS Nitze, I think that's how you pronounce it, shot warning flares, sounded its whistles, attempted unsuccessfully to communicate with the Iranian boats during Tuesday's incident, which American defense officials called unsafe and unprofessional. The U.S. Central Command spokesman, Commander Kyle Rains, said the Iranian vessels came within 300 yards of the American destroyer. The Nitze was accompanied on its mission by the USS Mason, another destroyer. The destroyer had to change course to avoid a possible collision, which was a tricky maneuver given the offshore oil rigs that are in that area. But eventually the Iranian vessel slowed before proceeding outbound. We're going to see more of that. They took some of our soldiers, sailors. Now they're harassing our warships. It's going to get a lot more dangerous. I told you last week about one watchdog group's effort to stop an Air Force major from displaying the Bible on his desk. Well, now that group is complaining bitterly because there was an investigation made and it was decided that this was not a threat. It was not overt. It didn't violate any Air Force regulations. But the group that is complaining says it is a brazen display of sectarian Christian triumphalism and exceptionalism. And the Air Force major simply says, no, it's my Bible. Air Force said, as pledged, we reviewed the situation there. We have concluded that no abuse of liberties has occurred. Major Lewis's behavior in the workplace environment are well within the provisions of Air Force Instruction 1-1, Air Force Standards, paragraph 2.11, and the free exercise of religion and religious accommodation is alive and well. The rules allowed for religious expression as long as it does not display partiality or coerce members of the military. The complainant is clearly not satisfied. It seems the major's department head conducted the investigation, so it can't be objective. We have Russian troops massing on the Ukraine border again, a southern part of that border. Bill Gertz, the Washington Free Beacon, reports up to 40,000 Russian soldiers stand poised to launch a full-scale invasion at this very moment. The Pentagon has identified 8 staging areas in Russia where large numbers of military forces appear to be preparing for incursions into Ukraine. As many as 40,000 troops, including tanks, armored vehicles, Air Force units, are now arrayed on the eastern border with Russia. Things have been relatively calm in Ukraine for a while now, but observers think that's going to change pretty quickly. According to a publication called Business Insider, Russian forces are, quote, encircling Ukraine from the north, east, and south. They don't do that because they have nothing else to do. Observers tell us the Russians have been feverishly upgrading, modernizing their strategic nuclear forces in anticipation of this particular conflict. But unfortunately, the U.S. military has not made similar strides under the Obama administration. As a result, the balance of power has shifted dramatically in favor of the Russians. You know what bullies do? Bullies bully. And if you don't stand up to a bully, they just keep bullying. And that's what's going on over there. You say, what's the big deal? It's in the Bible. The Bible points to a northern confederation of nations coming together at the end to wage war on Israel. Today we have Russia cozying up to Turkey. We have Russia cozying up to Iran. We have Russia involved in the battle there in Syria. She is pushing the Western powers to the limit. The North American Treaty Organization has backed off from interfering. Russia took the Crimea and eastern Ukraine, and nobody said much about it except how dare you. And now they're coming about round 2. What do you think we're going to do about this? And in the midst of all of this is a tremendous upheaval or reissuing of anti-Semitism throughout Europe. In Paris, Jewish students find public schools are a no-go zone. It's just too dangerous. There's pervasive anti-Semitism from teachers as well as pupils. The last 15 years have seen drastic shifts toward private Jewish education. France's President Sarkozy calls burkinis, the Islamic version of a swimsuit, provocation. He vows a religious sign ban. He's going to pass a law. Conservative ex-president running for the job again says a full-body swimsuit worn by some Muslim women indicates support for radicalized Islam. And a related article that probably has nothing to do with anything, the Canadian Mounties have allowed uniforms with hijabs. The Israeli Defense Force, which opened 7 criminal cases into the Gaza war, has closed 11 other cases alleging misconduct during the 2014 conflict, determining that no wrongdoing occurred in the deadly bombings. It also shut the book on school shelling, according to the military advocate general. However, it is still looking into looting by their own soldiers. The Middle East is the canvas upon which God's victory over Antichrist will be painted. And the coming of Christ with his bride, with the friends of the bridegroom, with the Old Testament saints, the tribulation saints who have been slain for the testimony of Christ, all of this is converging in this area outside of Jerusalem. For the movement we see today in all of these nations is preparatory. The Bible tells the story in terms of futuristic prophecy of a grand invasion of Israel by a confederation of nations. This will come from a confederation in the south. And as the Western leader is seeking to deal with the southern incursion, he will hear that there is a northern incursion. All of this is taking place toward the end of the Great Tribulation. The Western leader at that point is the Antichrist, and he's busy pushing Egypt out of his territory, has to turn around and go back and stand up against this northern confederation. You can read about it in Daniel chapter 11. That northern confederation will be led by Gog of Magog in and around the city of Jerusalem on the plains of Megiddo. The confederation will consist of Russia, Tobolsk, Turkey, Magog, and Iran, Persia. And that these three are now linked biblically is significant. It's not absolutely clear, but it seems, looking at Daniel chapter 12, that it is here the Antichrist meets his doom. So it's quite a ways off, at least 7 years from any point we even talk about it. But you see the pieces on the board being moved around. Keep your eyes on that eastern sky. Your salvation draws nigh.